Something happened that I don't think everyone will understand. When someone who sees patterns most people miss walks through hell enough times, they don't come out empty-handed. Eventually, even the darkest places begin to reveal their architecture. You start to see the seams in the walls, the doors hidden inside the stone, the places where the floor gives way, and the places where it holds. You begin to recognize the difference between a passage and a trap, between a guardian and a gatekeeper, between something that is asking you to grow and something that is simply asking you to surrender. And after enough visits, you come out carrying hell's blueprint in your hands. You remember where the doors are and who stands beside them. You remember which paths circle back to the beginning and which ones actually lead somewhere new. You remember where the walls move, where the beasts wait, which patterns repeat, and what happens when you pull the wrong lever. You carry the intelligence of every choice you made along the way, every consequence, every discovery, every moment when you finally understood something that had been trying to teach you for years. And at some point, the question changes. You stop looking backward, asking, why did this happen to me? And you start looking at the entire landscape with a different kind of curiosity. So, what is the solution? That's where I am. The work has become solving for X. I have spent a lifetime studying people, systems, patterns, behavior, leadership, energy, failure, transformation, and the strange mathematics of what makes one person rise while another remains trapped inside the same cycle. Then life gave me an education no classroom could have provided. I learned from the inside. I learned what happens when the map disappears. I learned what it takes to find your bearings again. I learned how much information exists inside an experience once you detach and become willing to study it. And somewhere along the way, I realized I had been collecting pieces of an answer. Every hard-earned lesson became another coordinate. Every pattern recognized gave me another piece of the terrain. Every time I found a way through something that once seemed impossible, I understood a little more about the underlying system, until eventually the pieces began to fit together. I'm not pretending I possess every answer. I don't. But I have enough experience to recognize patterns, enough perspective to see beneath the surface, enough understanding to recognize how the pieces interact, and enough hard-won knowledge to take what I have learned and turn it into something useful for the next person. Because I remember what it feels like to have none of the answers when the stakes are everything. I remember what it is to have the ground disappear beneath you and discover that the people, structures, beliefs, and assumptions you once relied upon cannot carry you through what is coming. I remember what it feels like when betrayal changes the shape of the room, when grief becomes physical, when fear moves into your body and stays there, when the life you thought you understood fractures into pieces and you are left standing among them, trying to figure out how to put your life back together again. These are the times when the usual language stops working, where everything happens for a reason is an insult to the depth of what you are living through. where positive thinking has no jurisdiction, where you can read every book, understand every theory, and know every prescribed step forward, and still find yourself staring into a darkness that requires something far deeper than advice. That is the kind of hell I mean, the kind that changes your nervous system, your perception, your relationships, your sense of time, and your understanding of yourself. The kind where you discover how much a human being can carry and still wake up the next morning. The kind where survival itself becomes an education. And when you finally begin to emerge, you carry something with you. You carry knowledge that cannot be taught from a distance. You recognize the architecture of certain rooms before the door has fully opened. You understand how manipulation works because you have felt it from the inside. You recognize the difference between surrender and surrendering yourself. You understand what happens when fear takes the wheel, when power is misused, when a person loses their center, and what becomes possible when they finally find it again. And somewhere in that journey, you learn faith, not the kind that requires everything to make sense before you trust it. The kind that is born when you have walked into the darkest room of your life and discovered that something inside you still knows which direction to face. That changes a person. This is where the map comes from. Experience. Years of watching patterns reveal themselves beneath people, systems, and circumstances, followed by the hard privilege of living through enough of them to understand what they were actually showing me. That's why I keep coming back to solving for X. Because eventually, after you've walked through enough fire, you stop seeing each experience as an isolated catastrophe. You begin to see the equation underneath it. You start recognizing the variables, the leverage points, the hidden assumptions, the places where one small change alters the entire trajectory. And then something extraordinary happens. The thing that once consumed you becomes information. The place that once terrified you becomes territory you understand. The experience that once seemed determined to destroy you becomes part of the intelligence you carry forward. I'm not claiming to have every answer. I am saying something much simpler and much more consequential. I have enough. Enough experience, enough pattern recognition, enough hard-won understanding, enough pieces of the puzzle to have built something real from them. An answer key. A map through terrain I have already walked. A way to take what life taught me at tremendous cost and turn it into something that can create clarity, power, and movement for someone standing at the edge of their own impossible choice. Maybe surviving hell wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was the research. And maybe the greatest thing you can do with everything that nearly broke you is to understand it so completely that it becomes part of the wisdom you use to change what comes next. I have walked through hell, studied the terrain, shook its hand, and carried the blueprint out. That is what I've been building all along. So that when someone reaches the place where their world falls apart and the map disappears, I can place one in their hands. Here, I know the way through.